Sometimes it's not the people you're against that annoy you, it's the ones you work with. Most of the time you can talk it out, but pro athletes don't have time for rational solutions. No, they have time to fight out their differences instead. And with that, we get 10 teammate fights in sports. Albert Haynesworth versus Zach Pillar. One of the worst free agents in the history of the NFL, Albert Haynesworth seemingly rubbed everybody the wrong way. This would cost him several training camps and one time even got him into a brawl with guard Zach Pillar. In 2002, in his rookie year, Haynesworth seemed to be in no mood to make friends and got into a scuffle. The brawl would lead him to being tackled down, pummeled, and yanked by his face mask. And no tears were shed. Steve Downey versus Akeem Aliyu. This is what happens when hazing rituals go too far. Up in Canada in the Ontario Hockey League, Steve Downey and Akeem Aliyu of the Windsor Spitfires, Aliyu was new to the team and refused to take part in the initial ritual of standing naked in a bus bathroom with another player. For even having the nerve of possessing self-respect, Downey popped him. After an actual hockey practice, Aliyu and Downey got into a scrap, where it seems like Aliyu gets the upper hand. Thank God for that. Steve Smith. Various. Steve Smith was an immensely talented wide receiver during his time in the NFL, but at the same time, he was one of the more violent players in the league, and that's saying something when talking about American football. Smith has been in a few fights with teammates of his. Members of Smith's hit list include Anthony Bright, Ken Lucas, and Gillian Gary. Lucas and Bright in particular got it bad as they both suffered broken noses from Smith's wrath. Bill Guerin versus Brett Draney. This arguably doesn't count much as a fight, but the violence involved made us include it on here. Both members of the Dallas Stars, veteran Bill Guerin and a young 21-year-old Brett Draney, began to mouth off at each other during a practice, and the verbal jabs turned into violence shortly after. Guerin would smack at Draney's neck with his stick like a sword, sending Draney down to the ice. This was a bad situation which could have been way worse. IK versus Geno Smith. You know a fight between teammates is bad when one of them ends up on the injured list. The eternally underachieving Geno Smith allegedly owed his teammates some money, and after Smith essentially told him he wasn't going to get the money, things turned bad. IK planted a fist on the jaw of Smith, which broke it. IK would then get cut by the Jets, and Smith was out for weeks, with Ryan Fitzpatrick carrying on in his absence. Keith Primo versus Bob Probert. Over the course of 15 seasons in the NHL, Keith Primo would become known as one of the toughest men in the league. This reputation, of course, was earned through several fights, and none was more infamous than his scrap with Bob Probert. Much like Primo himself, Probert was considered one of the league's biggest enforcers. These two tough guys slugged it out until a courageous coach stepped in to break up these two brutal Red Wingers. Bill Romanowski versus Marcus Williams. One of the most brutal and aggressive players to ever step on the gridiron, former Super Bowl champion linebacker Bill Romanowski was a steroid-fueled terror. His fearsome reputation wasn't just felt by his opponents though, but by his teammates too. While there have been several fights between Romanowski and his fellow players, the biggest one would have to be his attack on Marcus Williams. Both Oakland Raiders, Romanowski got upset at Williams for holding him on a practice play and rocketed off a punch which broke an eye socket. Williams would never play football again. Michael Westbrook versus Stephen Davis. Michael Westbrook was a mostly forgettable receiver throughout his few years in the league. The one thing he will be remembered for though is his savage beatdown on running back Stephen Davis. From the video we've seen, Davis is hunched up on the ground as Westbrook hammerfists him into oblivion. The incident cost Westbrook $50,000. Westbrook went on to compete in mixed martial arts after his retirement from football, entering a sport which actually encourages beatdown on teammates in training camp. Carlos Zambrano versus Michael Barrett. These teammates got at each other's throats so much that they had 2 fights in one day. Carlos Zambrano was one of the largest pitchers in MLB history, with an ego to match his 275 pounds. The first of his scraps with his own catcher came after an error leading them to fight in the dugout. The second round would come after the game, in the clubhouse, as it was only stopped because of interference of coaches and players. Satana O'Halpin versus Cameron Cloak. 1 shot. That's all that was needed for this teammate skirmish to end in dramatic fashion. The terrifying fusion of a Fijian woman and an Irishman, Satanta O'Halpin is not one to be trifled with. During a practice game with fellow Carlton Football Club player Cameron Cloak, O'Halpin got up to his feet and nailed Cloak with a left hook as his foe was on his knees. Even worse, O'Halpin gave him a nut shot while he was down. And yes, of course, this fight came in Aussie rules football. And that's it for our list. Did we miss out any great fights amongst teammates? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to TheSportster for more awesome content. Until next time.